Good morning and welcome to our Zoom worship service. We preface our service by acknowledging that the land on which our homes and our church were built was not uninhabited when European settlers arrived here with their ideas of conquest and ownership. For those of us who live in Moscow, Pullman, or other nearby communities, we live on the ancestral homelands of the Nimipu, called Nez Perce by the French-speaking traders, the Palouse, and the Shitshumsh, called the Coeur d'Alene. If you're joining us from another place, I encourage you to discover who inhabited or moved through the place where you now live in the times before colonization and genocide. We pause. We pause and remember that we live on ground that is sacred, ground that was stolen, ground that cries out for justice and for responsible stewardship. May our remembering help us find the courage to do our part to restore wholeness to the earth and all her peoples. And now let's join our voices together for our words of welcome, our unison chalice lighting, and our sung affirmation. Whoever you are, wherever you come from, whatever your beliefs, whomever you love, and however bumpy your life's journey, know that you are welcome here. We're hoping that everyone has a chalice or a candle to light and something to light it with. Let's do that now together.
Hi, I'm David Nelson.
I'm Nancy Nelson.
And I'm Kate Nelson.
In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek and seek to share.
From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung in every land by every tongue.
So in the United Kingdom, today is Boxing Day. And the historical roots of this holiday are quite lovely. People would box up the abundant leftovers and homemade gifts and bring them to the poor and the recently bereaved. These days, though, it's primarily a shopping holiday. Rather than cultivating a spirit of generosity, it's a day of sale prices and crowded stores, which doesn't sound much like a holiday to me at all. I mean, yuck. The pandemic has been hard on consumer culture, though, with shortages and supply chain failures, not to mention workers finally insisting on higher wages and better working conditions. In recent years, more people have been talking about things like the giant trash pile in the ocean, disposable fashion. Did you know that I wore the same dress for 100 days in a row this fall? Nobody even noticed. We're talking about the need to eat and shop locally. We hear the phrase late-stage capitalism a lot. So when I came across an article by an economist proposing that the pandemic might actually hasten the end of capitalism, it got me thinking. What comes after capitalism? What might a post-capitalist society look like? And what work do our values call us to in this time of transition? So let's shake off the excess of that Christmas meal and talk economics. But first, let's sing.
Now let us sing,
Sing to the
sing, sing. Now let us sing,
Sing to the
sing. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Now let us sing to the power of the faith within. Now let us sing,
Sing to the
sing. Now let us sing. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Now let us sing to the power of the hope within. Now let us sing, sing. Now let us sing, sing. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Now let us sing to the power of the sing, sing. Now let us sing, 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 sing. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Now let us sing to the power of the joy within.
For today's time of meditation, I'd invite you to reflect on the word enough. How much money is enough? How many things are enough? How much love is enough? How much work is enough? How productive do we need to be? Do you feel like you are enough? There's a Buddhist proverb, enough is a feast. For the person who is starving, having enough food would indeed feel like a feast. So what if we embraced the belief that what we are able to do and give and share is also enough? If we embrace the belief that that which we can offer freely and joyfully will in fact turn out to be more than enough? What if what we can accomplish with ease is a feast? In the silence, let what you have be enough. More, let who you are be enough.
Less is enough. I chose this title because I think that these three words capture the mindset that we're all going to need to adopt if we're going to survive the myriad crises of late-stage capitalism and hopefully build something better in its place. Now, if I were similarly to try to capture our culture's current way of thinking in three words, they would have to be more is better. More money, more followers, more clicks, more sex, more channels, more apps, more speed, more memory, more accomplishments, more stuff. Now, the unspoken premise is that at some point, all of this excess will lead us to prosperity. But has it? The idea that more is better is really a succinct recipe for perpetual dissatisfaction, for eternal hungering, and unquenchable desire. Because no matter how good you have it, it can never be enough. Because under capitalism, there's no such concept as enough. Even the billionaires can't stop hustling. A core tenet of the economic theories that underlie our capitalist system is that human beings are incapable of being satisfied. And we're living through the consequences of these theories being put into practice. Now, these theories are great for business and industry, and they're great for consumers, but they're not so great for human beings, or for any other living thing for that matter. We've been trained our whole lives to think that money equals happiness. And somehow we cling to this myth despite the fact that we're living in one of the most wealthy and yet one of the most depressed societies in history. So researchers went out and they asked a big variety of people how much money they would need to be truly happy. And everyone from the slum dwellers on up to the millionaires had pretty much the same answer, believe it or not. How much do you think it was? Well, everyone, rich or poor, said that all they needed was 50% more money than they already had, and then they would be happy. Do you see the trap there? Now, I'm sure some part of you is thinking, well, I'm certainly more happy with a nice house and clothes and food and a car than I would be living on the street. And that's true. There is a correlation between money and happiness, but only to a point. When you map people's incomes against their self-reported well-being, you get a graph that looks kind of like this one that I've misplaced. There it is. So, you can see that when you start from a place of no or very little wealth, that every increase in wealth comes with a big increase in happiness as well. But there's a very stark inflection point here, after which additional wealth provides almost no increase in happiness. Now, unfortunately, by the time we reach this point, this idea that more wealth gives us more happiness is so ingrained that we keep after it, even after the results have gone away. Now, the specific value of that inflection point, of course, changes with inflation and based on where you live, but currently in the United States, it's somewhere around $85,000 a year. So if you're making that much money, you already are as happy as money can make you. And it's likely time to start putting your time and energy into the sources of actual happiness, which I'll discuss in just a bit. So it's bad enough that having more stuff doesn't actually make us more happy. But the relentless pursuit of wealth actually makes us unhappy in a myriad ways. It deprives us of free time, rest, time with family and friends, civic engagement, good health, a functioning ecosystem, and so many other things that would actually make us happy, not to mention the stress, debt, and insecurity that come with this way of life. The pursuit of wealth is an addiction. Like any addiction, it locks us into a perpetual cycle of trying to solve our problems by doing more of what's causing them. This is sometimes called the rat race, and I like this picture. I think it captures it perfectly. The sign at the top always says, money is just around the corner. So, work harder, earn more money, buy more stuff, keep going, and repeat. Beyond making us miserable, the consumerist way of life is also killing the biosphere. Consumption is not a cause of environmental catastrophe, it's the cause of environmental catastrophe. Trash, air and water pollution, chemical spills, nuclear waste, global warming, loss of habitat, invasive species, extinction. It all starts with people wanting stuff. According to the book Natural Capitalism, industry moves, mines, extracts, shovels, burns, wastes, pumps, and disposes of 4 million pounds of material to provide the average middle-class family's needs for 1 year. 4 million pounds for 1 year. And that was 20 years ago, and even then did not include the waste generated overseas on our behalf. Many people in the industrialized world are very quick to blame environmental problems on overpopulation, but really this is more of a sleight of hand that ignores the way consumption patterns in developed societies multiply the effects of population. So to put it bluntly, the poorest 20% of people on Earth, which is over 1 billion people, only use 1.5% of the resources. And an average American child will have 50 times the environmental impact of a child born in a nation. Now, recycling is only marginally useful, since most products only consist of a small fraction of the total waste generated in their manufacture. Green consumption is another good idea, but wholly inadequate. Some products do have much less environmental impact than others, but all consumption takes a toll on the planet, and green products typically have more to do with relieving consumer guilt than they do with actually helping the planet. We have to buy less. So, if chasing after money and stuff doesn't make us happy, and is a threat to our very survival, why do we keep doing it? Part of it is the dopamine hit we get from shopping and acquiring, which is key to its addictive nature. Part of it is marketers and advertisers working full-time to keep us dissatisfied with our lives, so that we'll be open to their proffered solutions to problems we didn't even realize we had. Part of it is vanity, the desire to impress or at least keep up with the neighbors. And like I've mentioned, a lot of it is this flawed myth we've built our society on that more is better. In many ways, consumerism has assumed the functions in our society that used to be served by religion. It has become our source of meaning, the context of our shared experience, the standard of our worth, our route to salvation, and the focus of our daily toils. Shopping is its daily ritual, commercials, its sermons, televised millionaires, its priests. The economy has taken on the role once served by God and its unquestionable goodness, its unchallenged power, as a standard for morality and as the justification for human sacrifice and suffering. I'd love to spend an entire sermon on this topic of economy as God, but suffice to say it's no coincidence that "In God We Trust" is printed almost exclusively on our money, because that is the God we serve. These are all powerful forces, so please don't beat yourself up for the extent to which you find yourself under their sway. We all are to some extent. We're all products of our culture. But it is possible to loosen the hold of the consumerist mindset, and the key is to seek satisfaction, the point of enough, instead of ever seeking more. What this looks like in practice is simple, engaged living. Simplify and engage. Now, simplifying doesn't necessarily mean sacrifice or cutting back or belt tightening. What it means is owning only as much as you can actually appreciate and enjoy. Engagement means actually experiencing your life instead of paying other people to experience it for you. So what I mean by this is learning to cook instead of eating out, growing your own food, learning to repair and maintain your possessions, creating your own music, art, entertainment, and building relationships instead of settling for the perpetual disappointment that is social media. Our church recently held a clothing swap, and not only did this help the participants eliminate clutter, meet their needs without spending money, and keep usable clothing out of the trash, but it also brought people together and helped build a sense of community. Solutions like this are what it means to simplify and engage and break the cycle of capitalism. So the next time you're getting ready to buy a thing, stop and ask yourself, how else can I meet this need? How else can I meet my needs? Can I borrow it? Can I rent it? Can I make it myself or use something else instead? Will I even want this in a week or a month or a year? Taking this moment to stop and reflect is all it takes to put cracks in the cycle of addictive behavior and open up new possibilities. So if we're no longer going to commit our lives to the pursuit of wealth, how are we going to fill our days? For this, it helps to look at what would actually make us happy. Now, you can find a lot of different lists online of actual sources of happiness, but what it really all boils down to is three things. One, having your basic needs met, kind of that really steep part of the graph I showed before the inflection point. Two, nurturing relationships, and 3, meaningful work. Basic needs, healthy relationships, meaningful work. Have those and you'll have a pretty satisfying life. What these look like in concrete terms will differ for every single person, but I think what's important to remember is that the good life, however you define it, isn't about accumulating things. Less is enough. Or as Henry David Thoreau once said, a man is rich in proportion to the number of things he can afford to let alone. I assume that applies to women as well, and non-binary as well. In the world to come, we'll have to start once again thinking of ourselves first as citizens, as parents, as partners, as friends, as community members, as human beings interrelated with all the other living things, and maybe only after all that, as consumers. Thank you.
So the individual choices that we make to resist consumerism matter. They make a difference to our own well-being and our satisfaction with life, even if they have a limit, but sometimes they can have a more limited impact in the grand scheme of things. But I also want to invite us to spend some time today thinking about some of the bigger questions. The out-of-control consumerism that we're living with now started to ramp up here in the United States just after World War II. Somewhere between the 40s and 60s, we exceeded global replicability, which means if everyone on Earth consumed as much as Americans did, we would have exceeded the Earth's capacity to sustain us. And as it stands, taking all nations into account, with so many other countries following our example, by 1970 was the last year the human race was engaged in one planet living. 1970, my entire lifetime, we've been exceeding our planet's capacity to sustain us. The culture of consuming has continued to escalate, and it's driven, I think, in part by the belief that if the economy fails, the world will collapse. How many of you remember George W. Bush exhorting us to go shopping in the wake of the attack on the Twin Towers, right? There were echoes of this desperation in the conversation about the pandemic, too. We heard commentators discussing and debating how many deaths might be acceptable to keep the economy open. So there's a lot of pressure on us to buy into the belief that shopping and consuming is the only thing standing between us and the fall of civilization. But the truth is that it's shopping and consuming that's driving the fall of civilization. So how do we untangle that? I think if the economists and ecologists and sociologists are right and we are witnessing end-stage capitalism, each of us has a choice to make. Do we put our energy toward shoring it up, letting fear and uncertainty drive us to try to put off the collapse just long enough so that we won't have to be the ones to deal with it? Do we actively work to deconstruct and dismantle capitalism, pointing to its limitations and inevitable failure? Or do we put our time, energy, and money toward the creation of what comes next? And if we choose option 3, what is it that we are trying to build? Now, to some extent, I think all 3 options are actually valid choices. Capitalism isn't all bad, and the people who are shoring it up by building businesses and providing jobs are softening the impact on the most vulnerable among us and giving us a little more time and ways to adjust and survive. And we almost certainly need people like Ryan who understand and can articulate so clearly and beautifully why capitalism is making us miserable and killing our planet. But we also need folks willing to work on building the structures that will catch and comfort the people who find themselves in free fall as capitalism disintegrates. There are new ideas and practices emerging, to some extent because of the pandemic, and we might want to consider supporting and contributing to them. At the heart of all these ideas is the basic concept that we have to figure out a new economic system, one that doesn't rely on supply and demand, profit and loss, and the relentless focus on the bottom line, but rather a system that incorporates some measure of our well-being, both ours and the planet's. One example of how we might make this shift has to do with how some nations are starting to shift the focus from GDP, gross domestic product, to other measurement systems. In the Black, a business and leadership journal describes some alternative indices that are starting to emerge. First, there's the HDI, the Human Development Index. It's created by the United Nations, and it's a geometric means of normalized indices across 3 dimensions: life expectancy, average years of schooling, and gross national income per capita. So it's designed to sort of recognize people and their capabilities in assessing a country's development. Then we have the GPI, the Genuine Progress Indicator. This actually was created here in the US, and it incorporates social and environmental factors such as the cost of ozone depletion, crime, or poverty when evaluating a nation's economic health. The Thriving Places Index, the TPI, was developed in the UK. The TPI provides a breakdown of holistic elements that help support thriving communities and economies. It includes a wide variety of factors, including mental and physical health, education and learning, work and local economy, and green infrastructure to measure economic health. In China, they use the green GDP to measure the cost of environmental damage as a result of economic growth by subtracting factors such as resource depletion and environmental degradation from the GDP. And then they try to hold local governments accountable for ecological conservation. The Better Life Index, or the BLI, includes 80 indicators of well-being that provide a comprehensive picture of natural, human, economic, and social capital. And the Inclusive Wealth Index, the IWI, also developed by the UN, measures the wealth of nations using a comprehensive analysis of a country's productive base, including the assets from which human well-being is derived, manufactured human and natural resources. Meanwhile, the World Bank uses something called the Genuine Savings Indicator, or the GSI, which factor in the social costs of pollution in determining the overall levels of saving. Last but not least, the UK's Happy Planet Index, I love that name, the Happy Planet Index, developed by the New Economic Foundation, combines 4 elements: life expectancy, well-being, ecological footprint, and inequality to show how efficiently people in different countries are using environmental resources to lead long and happy lives. Now, I bring these up because I think if we change how we think about success and thriving, then we can, if we shift what matters in terms of assessing growth and development, we change our priorities. And on the governmental levels, using these alternative indices instead of GDP to determine policy might just help shift our laws and our infrastructure. So, what can we do, though, beyond shifting our own decision-making calculus? I've spoken before about the need to replace capitalism with an ethos of community care. An ethos of community care. Let me unpack that just a little. One of the trends that's emerging in activist and nonprofit circles is a focus on cultivating an ethos of mutual care and support. Locally, I might point to the Palouse COVID-19 support page or the Buy Nothing or Free and For Sale groups. Several of us are members, and so we get to witness the way a person comes forward and the community mobilizes to meet their need. Maybe it's a family escaping from domestic violence who needs new furniture, or maybe it's someone whose car is broken down and they need gas money to get to work. I've seen responses that range from, here's the phone number of the social service agency that can help you, to, I'll be right over. Both are appropriate and welcome. It's just people looking out for other people. Then there's the co-housing movement. I have this daydream about a UU co-housing development locally. In Thriving in a Post-Consumer Society, Dwayne Elgin, an internationally recognized author, educator, and speaker, writes, my wife and I lived in a co-housing community in Northern California for nearly 2 years. Our motivation was to explore an alternative to the alienation and isolation of single-family dwelling and lifestyle, and to see if there is a healthier and happier way of living in community with others. We didn't move into a commune with shared income, personal lives, and possessions. Instead, this was a setting that valued the privacy and integrity of people's individual lives while offering diverse ways of coming together in meaningful activities ranging from cooking and gardening to sharing common meals. Overall, we discovered a sense of kinship based not on material status and consumption, but on neighborliness, shared values, and mutual regard. We also found a community that cared for all of its children as well as for those who were aging and dying. Not to be laughed out was a generous sense of celebration for life with music and dance. I have a whole bunch of friends and colleagues who are part of co-housing communities, and I have to say, everyone that I know is really happy there. So, and there are other explicitly Unitarian Universalist co-housing developments in some places, so I'm just going to plant that seed. We'll see if it blooms someday. Worker consumer cooperatives are another model that are becoming increasingly popular and widespread. In theory, at least, the involvement of the consumers in decision making helps keep a focus not just on the financial bottom line, but on the well-being of the community. Here in the US, they tend to be micro-sized, like our own beloved food co-op. But there are bigger co-ops in Europe, including the largest cooperative in the world, an 800-store grocery chain in Spain called Eroski. So there's more. There's more that we can do. Strategies exist to help increase the durability of products so that we can buy less and keep things longer. In 2015, France made planned obsolescence illegal, subject to fines and even jail time. Then in 2018, Sweden cut the sales tax on repairs in half, leading the entire European Union to consider including a right to repair in its consumer policies. This is one of the things that frustrates me the most. You know, it costs more to reupholster a sofa than it does to buy a new one, which makes me crazy. And they design things to fall apart. Anyway, so right to repair is a big thing. Lifespan labeling is another thing that helps people make more informed choices. So when you buy something, it tells you how long it's expected to last. And lifespan labeling can be legally mandated and is legally mandated in some places, just like we now have the calorie count on our fast food menus. Truthfully, the more I read, the more evidence I find that in terms of the transition from consumerism to whatever comes next, this pandemic has sort of been a blessing in disguise, both showing us that we can make and survive huge changes in short periods of time, and also revealing the fragility and unsustainability of our on-demand stretch to the max supply chain. The transition to a post-consumerist mindset and ultimately a post-consumerist society does entail some loss. However, its commitment to quality of life and the development of an economics that takes human well-being and environmental sustainability into account that should drive this transformation. And what that means is that even though there will be loss, we will likely be happier on the other side. So, can we embrace and welcome these changes? You know, as I was writing this, I realized I think we are, each of us in our own way. So, let's just keep up the good work and remember always that enough is a feast. So be it, and blessed be. Let's sing together again. This is Wo Ya Ya.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Oh yeah yeah, oh yeah yeah, oh yeah yeah, oh yeah yeah. We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Oh yeah yeah, 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 oh yeah yeah.
For today's closing reading, I'd like to share with you a poem that I recently wrote. I know when we think about where poems come from, maybe we think about the side of a pond or a river rapids or the ocean side, a deep dark forest or a grassy plain. But for our today's service on post-capitalism, I think it's pretty fitting that this poem came to me while I was sitting in the parking lot at a Walmart having a quick bite to eat. This is Meditation on Eating a Banana. Think of the jungle dark, that living machine built of eons, built of 1,000 vital colors, 1,000,000 crawling shapes. Laid flat, riven, churned and readied for plantation. Think about the underpaid, overworked, brown-skinned hands that pulled it from the tree. The poisons that fended off all that hungering life, running with the rain, down to the stream, into the tendrils, into the fish, and back into the blood throbbing in those cracked hands. Think of the ships, the rainbow-slick rivulets streaming from their holes, and the clouds of burning oil drifting off semis like flies rising from a carcass, buzzing and full of heat. Think of the shelf stalker setting out plump bunches like rows of fat yellow fingers, trying not to worry about all those unpayable bills, trying not to think about the all-too-countable days devoured by invisible mouths. Think of the landfill where the peel will decompose, where its molecules will mix with microplastics, eternal foams, inks and pigments, heavy metals, oils, detergents, and 100 other synthetic compounds until they become lost in a toxic slurry, unable to bear life. I bite, chew, swallow, and praise. It's sweet and tender, feathery soft, full of comfort as a well-worn blanket. With all the pain embedded in this cream-colored ether, how can I not savor every last trace? What criminal would I be to let this life turn bitter, to squander a joy that blooms only in pools of sorrow? Thank you.
Please join me in saying the words to embody our chalice or candle flame. We extinguish this chalice that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light our paths as we leave this place. May it guide our way until we are together again. You know, I ate pretty rich food yesterday. I may not have been the only one. Our Christmas dinner was maybe just a tad over the top. And then I didn't sleep well. And I woke up this morning ready for something different, ready for, you know, salad. I ate salad for breakfast, basically. And I think, you know, it's sort of a metaphor. We've lived most of our lives in this society that tells us that what we need is not really what we need. That what we want isn't really what we want. So I think the way forward is really to touch with our own deep wisdom about our true needs, our true wants, to figure out what is enough, and to let what is just be enough. Enough is a feast. So may you all have enough today and always. I love you.